All right, so this is Together We Dream with Alex Oltzel, and my name is Will L. I'm one of the organizers. There's Ronak. He's also one of the organizers, and there's some other people in here who have been organizers or facilitators in the school. They know who they are. So we have some basic guidelines here at the ABC school that we want to go over for Zoom, some guidelines for discussions. So real basic stuff. I'm sure you've heard it all before, but we'll just go over it again. Make sure, if you can, to turn on your video. If you want to be anonymous, change your name so it's an anonymous thing and keep your video off. But if you want to be known, turn on your video. Take care of yourself, take breaks, feel free to eat or drink, step away. Doesn't matter, it's up to you. Um, Please, if you want to, add your pronouns as part of your Zoom name, um, whatever you're comfortable with there. Respect everyone speaking and keep the chat to everyone to a minimum so we don't clog up the chat. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking to make sure that the person who is speaking is getting the floor. And if you want to speak, we're doing the stack system in the chat, so it's type stack in the chat, and then we'll call on you in the order that it comes in. And then just to let everybody know, this workshop is being recorded and shared with the ABC school organizers, just letting people know. And for discussions, um, acknowledge people's pronouns if they have them. Use I statements, don't speak for other people. Listen carefully and have good faith and uh, just have a good discussion. Remember, democracy and organizing is messy, and that's okay. That's all right. So I'm going to give the floor now to Ronak, and he's going to introduce himself, and then we'll give it to Alex, and she'll introduce herself, and then we'll start the workshop.
Hey, I'm Ronak. I am one of the organizers for this workshop. I'm an architectural designer from Toronto, Canada, and I'm just really excited to be here. So next person is Alexandria.
Hi, everyone. My name's, please feel free to call me Alex. Sometimes Alexandra is a bit of a mouthful. Thanks, Mom. I am based in Columbus, Ohio. I am a recently licensed architect, although I know Peggy got beef with the licensure process in the US. I think many of us do. It's costly, it's expensive, and I wouldn't have done it if somebody else hadn't paid for it. But here we are now. So I'm working and practicing as a project architect on mostly university projects and simultaneously teaching at the Knowlton School in Ohio State. It's been quite lovely learning a lot, especially from students. They certainly have taught me a lot more than maybe anybody else. So today, I guess, to get to the topic at hand, we're going to be discussing our sort of personal narratives, writing our sort of utopian biographies. This is what we've been calling an act of engaging the self and understanding that our practice and that our work can be designed. Jack Self, who regrettably cannot be here today, we wish him well. We'll brief him on all of our festivities later. Once wrote the following, in which he viewed Jack's self as a kind of fictional construct, a persona that can be deployed in service of my agenda. Right. Now, I think sometimes my first reaction is to critique the sort of disembodiment of the self, of, who is Jack's self versus the person. But the act of constructing your own biographical fiction, because they are fictions, the sort of process of being an author of ourselves, of our personhood, means we regain, or at least think we regain, some control. And now, Jack has this sort of proven maybe case study, an extreme case study, but he's able to now seek choice in his projects. He's looking specifically for substantial or total control. And when something like compromise would blunt efficiency or efficacy. But I would also, as we go through our schedule of events today, I'm going to do a little bit more preamble. I sort of like, there's some guiding questions that I want us to use to frame the discussion, to frame how we talk about ourselves and how we want to think about our individual practices. This might be a sort of intensely personal, very, very deliberate discussion today. And I want you to speak with the greatest kindnesses, uphold our sort of community expectations and guidelines, and remember to listen to each other. This is the last workshop of the week. So I hope you still got a little bit of energy, drink another cup of coffee or tea. We'll keep it moving. I'm going to maybe just, I'm going to share my screen in a moment here. Let's see. Make this big. Share screen. I'm just going to leave it like this. Okay. So here's our sort of guiding questions. This is something that Jack and I were kind of fiddling around with and developed this list. And I'm going to give you all of this sort of wealth of information at the beginning here. And as I'm going through things and things pop in your mind, please take notes and bring them up for discussion afterward when we open the floor. I wanted to maybe review these with you really quickly, where we're sort of asking and hoping to kind of tease out some underlying themes and ideas in each of your individual preferences. I mean, in some ways it is a preference. But, you know, what is your dream for your career? If you choose to dream of work or labor, you know, what is the type of work that you're doing? What conditions are you choosing to work in? Which is sometimes, what time of day is it? I've included my own biography in here with some notes about the time of day, because the time of day where you're most active and you feel like working is sometimes very variable. A lot of us, we hit, you know, sometimes 7 p.m. and I'm feeling really good. I've got some great ideas going around. Some people are 7 a.m. I'm really curious about what effects you want your work to have. What are you, you know, what's the response? What's the feedback? What are you up to? Is that something very tangible and local and immediate, or is it something very hard to kind of discern, to even place value on? Maybe it's quite easy for you to place value on, but it's misinterpreted or misconstrued by others. How might others relate to you? Are they internal to your discipline? And then lastly, and perhaps more closely aligned with the theme of this entire week, how has your education prepared you for this work? And how would you have designed your education to better prepare you for your chosen utopian work? So I've included my own sort of handwritten account of myself, where I sort of refer to myself as a subsistence farmer, a sort of ad hoc organizer, a not particularly witty cartoonist, and an occasional architect. And architect is sort of the last thing on this list of things that I might sort of align myself with. And as you can see, as I'm writing this, and I really wanted to keep it kind of scatterbrained, I guess, or crossing things out and adding and writing on top of other things, because the work of the biography is something that is going to be continuous and it sort of needs to be edited. And as you edit and work on yourself and on your own sort of fictional constructs, it's going to be a bit messy. It should be messy. It is life. But I write that one of my challenges most recently, and that I'm quite coming to terms with, is I sort of grew up to be a reader as opposed to a writer, although I have authored. And in many ways, the things that I write are things that I've built. And that's how I've been shaping space lately. That's how I've been sort of writing and publishing. It's in works of architecture, which is very specific. It's in built works and not necessarily the same for all of you. you'll notice in maybe some of the examples that I pull up that it is a theme. I write about how the sort of education, this education of mine, the one outside the academy and the one beyond, the sort of extra education, assuredly not extraneous, taught me, as opposed to perhaps the traditional academy. So I want you to think also about the sort of secondary or tertiary, the sort of non-obvious educational sources. Your mother, for example, is one. Any aunties that you've got, mentors of any sorts, or sort of what I would consider outside the academy, or sort of your extra education. So I'm going to share a few. I got 5 different practices here. This first one is called Tiny WPA. I was just raving about them to Will and Rona. They do a series of smaller projects, the sort of community-led design build, and they're focused on sort of, as you see here, a picnic table, but also play structures. They're educational, and they're fun. They sort of community first, so members of the community are the ones constructing the project. They're organized by the Tiny WPA. They're located in Philadelphia. So if you're curious and you're moving around, I'm sure they would love to have a hand, and you'll probably see their work. It's more often than not, you know, chock full of children having the time of their lives in the middle of the street. So they're occupying city space, civic space for play. This is a picture with Shally Halstead. She's right here. Shally is quite a lovely person. She started the Black Women Build Baltimore. So she works more sort of coming from a construction development background. She's not an architect, but we would be happy to have her considered a member of our discipline. She's certainly part of the construction industry, but she's started this nonprofit to purchase vacant properties, and she'll hold them in her trust. And then women, and this is focused on specifically Black women, are able to apply for ownership of the homes, and then they work with Shally through materials donated, you know, donations, etc., to build their home with her. She teaches them how to run plumbing, run electrical, how to drywall, how to frame, how to insulate, so that they are able to care and maintain for their homes after the point of occupation. So there's really something really lovely about care and maintenance that she is teaching, as well as, you know, addressing a sort of urban blight and addressing at-risk communities. This is another kind of lovely little group, and this is Public Works Architecture. So there's 2 projects back to back here. So this one is a nonprofit practice that's doing a lot of community work, but also moving into, as you can kind of see here, exhibits and publications. So not just built things, but written. So the ability to disseminate your work, sometimes it's easier to communicate, you know, when you can sort of leverage media, different types of media. I also bring up the Office of the Public Architect. This is my future firm in Chicago. As you can see, I'm a bit, I'm trying not to be too Midwest centric or too US centric here, but I definitely have a bit of a bias for what I'm familiar with. Again, the Office of the Public Architect is sort of a riff off of the public defender, public attorney, and a sort of public health network. So architects are often compared to doctors and lawyers, but we don't actually have a sort of public arm, besides, you know, maybe in a weird way, the permitting office, but there's no public architect to defend the public against bodies that be. And then this sort of last one is a little, and even maybe further away from built play structures in the middle of the street. Spatialagency.net, there's also a publication about this. this one is really an online database that's covering all sorts of works and projects and places. I think they talk about how Cedric Price once said that not all projects were spatial, that were spatial required built responses in a way. This is probably true. I think, you know, if this is a sort of spectrum of examples, I'm a little bit closer aligned to the WPA and how I want to work and what I'm up to, but by no means is it limiting or all-encompassing. And then lastly, I'm going to end on our questions again. I wanted these to sort of be on your mind to help you. And I think our conversations will sort of range and vary and move all around, I hope. Ronak graciously offered to share his own biography and kick off our discussion. So we really appreciate him for that, and we'll listen intently. But I also wanted to make sure that you all know that you can interject really at any point with questions or comments. And that's how we're going to kick us off there. So Rona?
Just give me a sec. So then I should just share screen. Where's that?
Should be at the top.
Should be the top.
Or at the bottom. I don't know how your screen is set up.
Okay. Share screen. And yeah, can you see it?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, so this is just like a quick sort of thing that I came up with, but like for your own biography, feel free to add in pictures, images, more paragraphs, less paragraphs. This is just an example. So for mine, I decided to just write these 3 paragraphs and let's just go on with it. So I would like to work in an office that was converted from an old warehouse or has some other history that was neglected until me and others had moved in. I have my own space in Midtown downtown Toronto or another city, who knows? And I have actual work-life balance. So working like more of the typical Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I am sharing the space with friends that I made during school and other jobs connections, and we have a mix of disciplines that can work on projects that are at the local level. So think of the Greater Toronto area, but sometimes we work on projects for other cities and countries. The types of work that I would like to do include adaptive reuse of social affordable housing, placemaking, tactical urbanism, and exhibition design. With the exhibit design, I want to learn more about the AR and VR side of things so that I can actually augment those experiences in that way. This basically means that I want to do architecture plus and not just completely leave the profession, because I do think I have something to offer this industry, and like I'm just a really stubborn person that doesn't know when to quit. I also want to continue writing articles about urban planning and tactical urbanism, because those are things I actually enjoy, and I do think that there is value in creating those like, sort of like 101 type of documents that people can learn from. I do think that there are aspects of my education that prepared me, but I think that if I were to go back, I would have actually added in maybe a graphic design class or like another theory class, like so something in conjunction with like all the building science project management classes that I had to take back in the day, because I think that would have actually made it much more impactful and not just a super technical sort of education. And I would have been more well-rounded with some more electives. So let's see. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Renata. I appreciate it. I think you've brought up some interesting themes here, especially, you know, you say architecture plus. sort of, especially in your education, having more electives. When you think about how the curriculum is constructed with sort of studio as the anchor, as the thing that everything else is elected to participate with, there could be something quite radical about, the studio and the elective reversing roles. I want to also make it clear that anyone is, I'll go ahead and share my screen again here so that the questions are popped back up. But anyone is welcome to speak at this time.
Ronak, do you think if you had gone to a school that had done those sort of architecture plus subjects, would you instead be asking for the classes you took now, the detailing and the project management classes?
Possibly, but I think maybe that's like and there's another question of like, how much should we teach each of these subjects? So maybe if something that's completely much more well-rounded, like that's actually more of a balance between the theory and the practical sides of things earlier on in my education, like it would have worked out maybe a bit better in my favor. So.
Go ahead, Peggy.
Ronak, I'm interested in your desire to keep writing and working about tactical urbanism. And I might be taking that too literally, but I see that as writing as also part of your career. And then I wonder whether your education could have better prepared you for that, or it did in a subliminal way. How do you feel about that?
I feel about that. I think in terms of that just comes from like doing my own research and my own sort of thing. Cause like I don't think I ever I never had like a more of a formal like urban planning class. Like maybe I had one or two, but like they didn't really cover that sort of thing. They covered more of the like the legal stuff, the zoning, form-based codes, things like that. So like, I mean, maybe subliminally, maybe just like something that sparks, maybe something about that just sparked my interest in it. But like, I do wish it was much more explicit and a little bit more like, okay, this is what tactical urbanism is.
Just to say, I'm curious because I too feel that all of the kind of theory and writing work I do is totally self-educated. That came from my education. Other than my education put forward a sense of how important our acts were. And so I can't say, but anyway, so I'm curious about that self-educated side. Sorry.
So your tactical urbanism is not a euphemism for punching Nazis?
No, but with the way things are going in America right now, who knows?
Keep your options open, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
Banju, you're in stack.
I'm actually trying to, first of all, I think thanks Alex and Ronak for sharing your biography, because I think it's very hard to share our own life histories. And I hope I treat it with the respect it deserves. I'm also seeing that it's resonating with a lot of my own life narrative, and something that Peggy raised also is very close to my heart, because I think I also do not see myself as somebody who's kind of a mainstream architect. I do not practice as somebody who helps create buildings. That's not my métier anymore. I almost end up doing most of my thinking and acting through writing these days. And I see myself first as a researcher and then an architect and then an urban planner. So it's very nice to hear that I'm not alone in that self-identity. And also, I think what Peggy raises seems very, very pertinent, because I often, even nearly every day, think my K-12 education seemed to prepare me better for writing and reading than, say, the 5 years I spent in an architecture program. And I also felt a lot like an imposter, because I was using most of my reading and writing skills to get through architecture school, but I had to do some translation into the visual medium. And I think one of the ways we could push is to actually really see how, as Tommy was saying yesterday, that there are many ways of making architecture, and if we could just bring those other ways of making architecture into the discussion, as we are doing here and in other events this week, it would be a huge contribution to architecture education and the discipline itself. And I'm going to stop now with a question about where do we see this kind of a narrative working? So is it as a personal endeavor where we do this for ourselves when we enter the program, when we exit the program, or is this something that an employer might require? As say in my case, when I go to apply for, say, an assistant professor's position, I am required to write a research statement, a teaching philosophy statement. And I see it totally being possible to weave in some of these ideas and thoughts into those statements. But there are some very clear formats and expectations around what a statement on research or a statement on teaching philosophy might look like. So maybe we could think a little bit more about the audience we write for, and how that itself influences the way we think about ourselves, right? It's like a two-way relationship there. And I'll stop here now.
I'll respond really quickly, because I think you bring up a great point about what is this thing? What is the how does the biography sort of proceed? And in some ways, at least in the way that, for example, Jack has used it, right? It's a very specific action plan for himself and to guide him as an individual through his work. So it's interesting to see, I think, how it could potentially vary, especially based off of audience and format. And formatting, I think, is very interesting. But I don't know, it does operate as an individual exercise, a sort of work done. We're working on it collectively here in a fashion. But I sat down by myself, had another cup of coffee, and wrote this and thought through it by myself. And there's something I went to about that process that maybe demands that a little bit, in the fact that it is a sort of deeply personal thing that I'm open with sharing. To be clear, it is here, but I think the way that it becomes actionable and that the strategies that we use to achieve our individual ambitions are not immediate, they are not obvious, and they will more than likely require you to act on some or with some sort of collective. So it's a process where at moments you are probably very much alone, but with the idea that you aren't stuck, or you're not stopped, or you're not stagnant, and you're not, if you are open and willing to share, there's more than likely quite a kind and receptive collective or organization, community that will support you and help you realize these ambitions. Peggy, you're next in stack. Pick up on that thread.
I think it's a super interesting question. I'll just say I really thought of this as the revolution starts in yourself. I mean, you have to identify with the conditions in order to change them. But to add to your list, Manju, which I think is really interesting when you talk about it, is it for yourself or is it for the employer? I would also add that it's related to the issues of transparency and education that we've also been talking about in a lot of the different sessions, that one of the things that those of us who teach can do is be transparent to our students about what our ambitions are for the course that we're teaching. And so this narrative, fits into that as well. So.
How's everyone feeling? What are you thinking about?
I do work at a firm that does historic reuse and adaptive reuse and sustainable, affordable housing. However, we're in Wisconsin, so even if they're in favor of that stuff, they're still a little bit skirting fascism in their political views. So I would eventually like to get to a firm that I don't have to fear about talking about my political views, because it's getting really much harder as my career goes on. And as I keep working on projects where I go, I can make a design move, but would it be seen as too political? And I'm losing my patience, kind of.
Will, what you said, sorry, I think Ronak is on Stack and I totally missed entering my name in Stack. Ronak, go ahead.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, so I was just gonna ask Will, so what you're saying is basically like the people that you work for, projects you're working for, even though they do have sustainable in the name, you somehow said that they're facilitating fascism. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, or if you're comfortable, or?
Sure, I can elaborate. Let's get political here. I live in Wisconsin. It votes purple. I live in Madison, which is a blue city. But the architecture scene here, in particular, the architecture scene here, I don't know why, is a lot more conservative than its surroundings. And in fact, in my last job, there were several people who worked in Madison but lived outside of Madison and constantly disparaged the city for being too liberal, despite that they got all their money from that city. So my coworkers now, they're a little better, but the way that, because our audience, the people we went to, it's a developer slash builder, poor people, right? People in poverty, people looking for affordable housing, people looking for help with rent, right? I've lived in those apartments. I'm not sure how many of my coworkers have lived in those apartments or if they really care. Um, there's a lot of comments that I've heard out of the corner of people's mouths, sort of quietly, about the people who rent from us. And besides the fact that it's mean to disparage people who are paying you money for something, it's also kind of like a little unsustainable in our own practice. Like, how long is my coworker going to be here if he genuinely hates the people that buy his work? So, there are some people in the organization whose job it is entirely to not, at the very least, not market in a way that would be off-putting to people who need affordable housing. and are very conscious of their words with that. But there are some people, particularly in the design department, who don't have to deal with that, who are very cavalier about their opinions. And it's kind of like, how do you work with somebody who so blatantly despises the types of people that you do work for? I mean, that's what our designs are for. That's what they're geared towards. And my boss is pretty good. He's all right. He's a great guy. And I get the sense that he's in here genuinely for the type of work that we do. Some of my coworkers, on the other hand, are not. And they're just here for the paycheck. And the reason for their work is money, which is fine. But you got to be a little less callous and a little more empathetic, I think. And so when I say skirting fascism, that would kind of be it. Because attributing malice to an outgroup when you're serving that outgroup is bullshit. And also, one of the tenets of fascism is to establish an outgroup, but be reliant on that outgroup to retain your own power.
I think Manju is next on stack.
So Will, what you say actually, again, it resonates because I have had similar experiences. And in those moments, I was probably too naive and I didn't actually share my concerns anywhere. And I chose to exit those situations. But in hindsight, and also I'm also drawing from something that we discussed in last evening's workshop, at Tommy's workshop, about how do you resist and survive at the same time, right? How do you not exit situations, because it's not always an option, and also it's probably a space for very generative thinking and action for you personally. And I'm just thinking that drawing from something that Alex said earlier, that finding a community and connecting with people. And if you already see your boss as somebody who's a potential ally, I think it could be a moment for a safe conversation outside of, like a private one-on-one conversation, a very candid conversation, where you definitely make sure that you are interested in engaging with the boss and kind of continuing your work here. You're very happy that you have their support, but there is a concern about the peer environment, your coworkers and colleagues. And I think that could be one way to safely and constructively engage with what you're perceiving in your work environment. And certainly, I think some of the reasons that our built environment doesn't reflect the values we want, the progressive values of, say, the people who live there, is because the ones who invest money are probably conservative folk who don't live in downtown Wisconsin, but maybe live elsewhere. And I'm going to stop there. I want to hear from others.
Looks like, sorry, Laura, looks like you're next in stack.
Yeah, I tried to write. I think it's a really interesting exercise, this one, to try to think about your biography. I think it's something really interesting to ask students in their last year, for example, because it's something that really makes you think about all that you have done so far and you actually want to do on the next 8 years in this case. And it was really hard. I couldn't make something really like straightforward, because I'm on this position. Like I usually when people ask what I'm doing, I say I'm in the limbo because I finished my master's, that it's like a minor PhD here in Brazil. It's not the same as in the US or Europe, I guess. So it's like, okay, I finished my master's and now I need to decide if I'm going to my doctorate. And I'm almost on my mid-30s, and I'm still like in the middle of the way to somewhere. And it's really frustrating because I can't be a teacher yet, because here in Brazil, you need basically to have a PhD to get inside the bigger universities, like to get to the public universities that here are like the bigger ones. And we have this shitty government right now that we really want to change. I don't know, Vitor, I saw you were Brazilian too, so I don't know if you want to comment on something on that, but at least from my point of view, if we stick to the same president for the next 4 years, it really changes where I think I'm going to be on the next 8 years or what I want to do. So it's really hard to do this biography right now, because so much can change in, I don't know, in the next 1 year. So trying to respond to the questions that you made. So what would I most like to do? I probably would answer, I like to teach, but not in a traditional way. I don't know if I could say traditional, but not in this way that, I don't know, I see many people following this path of being a theoretical professor that only do the research, because here you can choose, like when you enter the public university, you need to be a researcher and a professor. And some people wouldn't like to do both of those things. Like, so some people would prefer to be only a researcher, and some people would like only to be a teacher. But as we discussed the past week, you don't have much background for being a professor. So usually people will just follow the researcher path or just be a professor, like a panelist, like you go in front of your class and you present something. And this goes straight on the opposite side of what I want to do. Like you saw some of the Freudian presentations here, like the bankery education. I think this is the translation. So you see students like people that will receive the knowledge that you are there to give them. It goes totally the opposite side. So I want to be a professor, but I also want to be a practitioner, but in both professions or this both places, I don't want to do the traditional way. So I don't want to be a traditional professor, and I don't want to be a traditional practitioner. So I would like to be on the bridge, make the bridge between the university and community and society. But I don't want to, I think I would be a professor with a really heavy foot on the outreach part of this profession. And I really believe in this tripod that we have here, like education, outreach, and research. So I would try to keep this tripod together and balance it. And dream for my career. I actually never thought about career. I think we are so occupied trying to survive here right now that it's like, I wish I can survive. Like, I wish I can have this balanced life where I don't need to work 60 hours a week. I have just to pay for my own bills and to pay for my food, because so it really depends. And for me, this is all really linked to the political aspect of life. Like here we have this government, and if it was another government, I think a lot of things would be different. So I think bringing the political layer to education and to the professional activity, it's really important. And I don't know if we have this or have had this in the past 2 decades. I don't know, because I know in the 90s, it was still something really present here, like this political engagement of professionals and students was really strong, at least from my research and other people's research too. So I would try to bring this back. So maybe be a professor that also works on this technical aid kind of activities we hear that we call advisory here. Try to make this bridge. What else? What are the questions? Under which conditions? Where are you? Well, this is a tricky one because, as I said, it's really hard to be a public employee here, if you really don't agree with the majority of the population, like this past 4 years, I really didn't want to work for the population that elected Bolsonaro. Like, I really hate you people. So it's really hard to continue to work for these people. So if they keep electing this kind of representatives, those kind of representatives, it's really hard to keep working for them for a really shitty salary. Like, I can't even pay my bills. So we are almost working for free as a researcher, or as maybe, I don't know, early career professors. You're basically working for free for a better country for these kind of people. So it's really hard to keep thinking like, where are you? Well, I don't know if I want to stay here. Right now, I don't. Right now, I wish to fly away from to somewhere. But I don't know, maybe 8 years from now, it will be a different country. Time of day, I think I would be not early bird, but I live with really a bat. So I know how it is to work in different time of the days, and he's really judged by the time of his work. So I'm a lucky one, I think, because I can work on a traditional daytime. Who are you with? Well, I found, like we were saying, I found many allies during my career, during my, I don't know, this my evolution as a person, as a human being. So I have some people that I know I would like to work with, keep working, or try to work with. Some of them can be you guys. The effect that my work would have, probably not a singular, like if you work on this traditional office that you build a house for a family, it's nice that you are going to impact this family's life. But I think I would like to work with these technical advisory people that would have an impact on this community, or this, it's a broader impact, not only to make one family's life better. Even if it's like this non-profit organization, we have some debates about this kind of activities. Like sometimes you, here in South America, I think it's from South America, there's this organization, it's called Teto. So they raise funding to make some improvements, like to gather people, gather materials, and go and remake a house, like one people or many, some 2 or 3 families. And it's really nice, it's really important, but it's like you go there and it change those specific people's lives, and then you move to another city. So how much of an impact you actually made. So I still think that we need public policies that actually do something on the long term for these people. So I don't know. I can jump in other people's talk.
I think I'm next on stack, and let me just say, I started thinking about this from Will's situation, and now kind of bridging it to Lara's. And I'm just going to say something so obvious. It's like the fact that in our offices or our careers, wherever we're working, that our acts as architects, or those conditions of employment, never talk about architecture being embedded in the world. I mean, Will, you're saying it's like all this suppressed politics that no one's talking about, and just pretending these acts are completely in a vacuum, just completely in a vacuum. I just find astounding. And so one could say, it makes me think about radical democracy, and there should be a law that everywhere you work, there's this Friday meeting where you all talk about your personal situation and your politics, and where the things that you're doing for the rest of the week sit within those things. They should just happen. But anyway, it's kind of emphasized, but what Lara is saying is like, she can't even make predictions because it's all dependent on the government. You know, it's like that relatedness or embeddedness or dependencies, which we never talk about in our acts, is just so apparent here. That's anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I feel the same as Laura. I can't make any long-term career plans because in 3 years we might not have a democracy anymore. So what am I supposed to do with that? If 10 states secede from the Union, well, now NCARB doesn't matter because it doesn't go to all 50 states. It goes to 40 states and a separate country. So, you know, it's kind of like I want to go work in the UK. Well, what if the UK, because of Boris Johnson, who's now out, so this is a hypothetical, what if the UK bars travel from the US? Okay, well, now I can't do that. What if I want to go work for the government? What if I want to work for the DOD? Well, I can't do that because I've been arrested at a protest. That sucks. What are these limitations that politically limit our careers? Because we do live in a world, and we do and the world does have effects on our work. And even in university, it's still a little bit tough to approach these subjects because a lot of people very visibly do not want to acknowledge that, oh God, my life might be different in 5 years, and I can't help that, and I can't do anything about that. So I'm just going to kind of ignore it and hope for the best. And I would like to not do that. And then also more to Peggy's point, there's a certain workability in what is the term? There's a term for it, but I'm forgetting it. Basically, where you don't know other people's intentions, so you assume better things to work with them better. I would rather not know what my employers think of the Jews, because it might be bad, and I'm Jewish, so that's not going to work. And I'd rather not know, and just assume that they're probably decent people. And that's how I feel about that.
Great. Thank you all for your comments and conversations. The sort of thread of our relationship to the sort of politics of our organization, of our government, is interesting. I think, when I was first growing up and sort of my early education, both the sort of like K through 12 idea, right? Manju mentioned how a lot of the reading and writing and a lot of skills learned were developed, middle school, high school. I think I still reference fifth grade test taking strategies when I was taking the AREs. Read the answers before you read the question, skip if you don't know immediately. Those things are still ingrained in me. And there's a lot of sort of education that I was privy to as a result of my upbringing. And so I grew up on a farm, which is a very specific sort of way of living. It was rural Ohio. So some of you are familiar with US politics, some of you are not. In general, and especially in Ohio, which is also another one of those purple states, maybe less so now than it was in the past, has a tendency to sort of flip-flop. We have larger metro areas, which are generally blue, sort of left-leaning liberal politics, and then the rural areas, which are a little bit more Republican, red, a little bit more conservative. And so I grew up, and the majority of my family are still very much in line with those politics. And so I was, it was rather indirect, I think, as I was growing up, or maybe I wasn't as aware, paying attention to specific names or ideas or policies, but there is a way of thinking and looking at the world, which is great when you're on a farm, which is self-sufficient, hyper-local, very contained in a way. I mean, you could look at it from the environmental perspective. You could say, actually, you're not you're not contained at all. These are incredibly damaging things that you're doing to the environment sometimes, but neither here nor there. That is also a great point, Will. Think about the corn subsidies in the Midwest. A lot of what is grown is not purchased, but ours was a smaller farm. And so I think I went through K through 12. I went through higher education. I went through even now, thinking that I need to work and I need to act near me. So I need to have my hands on the thing. It needs to be tangible. And this is why I'm really drawn to nonprofits like Tiny WPA, where it's educational, it's specific. I'm teaching my neighbor, I'm teaching my neighbor's children how to build something and how to make or shape the space that they're in. And so I want the individual to have some level of agency and emphasis. And sometimes it's like contained to your apartment. And then you say, oh, here's my neighbor. I've somehow interacted with them. I've walked past them. I'm going to converse with them. And so that's where the openness and that's where the transparency, and that's a critical step to moving outside of yourself into, you know, again, it's still in the grand scheme of things, when we think about how large and how impossible it is to understand these collective networks, to understand, I mean, I have a hard time, Laura, knowing and picturing in my head. I have to remind myself, you're in Brazil. It's like, and then the map comes up in my head and I was like, okay, geographically, she's down here somewhere, but she's only 1 hour ahead of me. And so it's a totally different world that you're occupying. And I can only see you here in this little screen. And so sometimes, like, this is, you know, third or fourth step of branching out, is finding somebody, you know, you can make these notes for yourself, right? Today I'm talking to myself. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to my cat. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to my sibling or my family member, right? Somebody who's close, or your best friend, right? And the day after that, I'm going to find the next network. I'm going to branch out further and talk to my neighbor, or I don't know, some of us have landlords and property managers. Some of us have maids. Some of us have, you know, different services, right? When you go to get your cup of coffee, conversing with others. And then eventually one day you reach a platform like this and you're like, oh my goodness, the access and the ability and the resources that we have with each other. This is quite an extended network. But it takes, I think, time to reach it. And maybe also it doesn't feel very tangible because in part it's hard to perceive. Those are my thoughts right now, but I appreciate the corn communism. Thank you, Will. And I'll open the floor to anybody else who would like to speak. Definitely don't want to hog all of our time.
So I think Lara is next on stack.
I don't know if Peggy wants to comment something. She comment before. No. I was actually thinking like this one complaint we always have and always hear, it's that we don't learn enough during our undergrad years. And we actually learn when we go to the real world, to the office, to actually work. And I was thinking that it needs to change, or, I mean, I understand that education won't cover everything. But also, I think that the kind of work you learn don't need to be the office one, you know? That's why I was thinking this future of mine, where I could make some changes to education. Like if it's something that we already have here, I'm not like reinventing the wheel, but something that it's not really common is to have those kind of public office, like you were showing an example, Alexander, And it would be nice to give the students an alternative option to the real life work that's not only the office that attends those individual clients from usually gated communities here. So people that already have some money. So it'd be interesting to have this alternative for them to fulfill their internship hours that they are obligated. I think it's the same in the US. I don't know, you need to complete some hours in office, and would be interesting to have this alternative option, like a cooperative way of working, not an office, a traditional office, or anyway, other kinds of real life work that are not the work in the office. So could be a public office, could be this technical aid office, but different ways of organizing the labor, not only this hierarchical, attending individual clients way of doing things. Because I think if you leave the professional activities to the professional market to teach our students, I think it kind of lose some of the purpose. Like you do all this work during during class to teach our students about diversity, about social housing, about all these kind of important things that can influence people on their practitioner life. But then you leave the internships for the market, for the traditional professional market. And this doesn't make sense to me. Like, why we don't give different options for people to complete their internship hours? Like, they could work on a farm, they could work on different places, like not necessarily follow the mainstream path, because I think it won't actually change, like, has so much potential. We have so much potential to actually change the reality of our profession, and we are skipping this step.
I think Will is next on stack.
Well, I've got a few things to say to Laura about. So in the US, we have our NCARB system, and we have the same amount of hours, I think, or maybe less, or I mean, we need internship hours. But we have Section A for architecture and Section O for other stuff. And I've used quite a few Section O hours. There's a certain limit. There's, I think, maybe 1,500 out of 4,000 hours that can be used for Section O. But I've used quite a few of them in engineering firms doing construction documents and detailing blueprints and stuff. And the only difference is architecture firms are prepared to do that. So they've already submitted all their licensure to the organization, showing that they're credible and they can correctly judge the work that you're doing. But none of the engineers have done that. So it's always a real hassle to get your boss to be like, all right, I need every document you've ever had since you graduated college 40 years ago now. So it's a little bit of a barrier, but the option does exist. And I had another point and I forgot it, so I'll just give it over to Peggy.
I feel like I'm going to take this in a not helpful direction because I think those specifics matter. But just to say, Alex, what you were talking about in terms of the expansion of, I would say, of your community, who you first felt embedded in and obliged to and concerned with, and then that kind of grew, and now it's grown to this forum, which, as you're saying, feels good but distant. And but just say I'm thinking about one of the sessions yesterday, which really asked us to describe the dissolution of a community. And I was just shocked that, you know, when people did this, people identified their community as anti-capitalist. You know, some of us did it very specifically. And so how you identify as a community, I think, is part of what you're saying, and that there are big ones and little ones and local, and, you know, there is like a Russian doll. But I personally do think that when we identify that one of our communities is architectural workers, things open up. I mean, that's partly why we're all here. And that's why we can relate to each other's stories, you know, despite, you know, Brexit, or, you know, fascist governments in Brazil, or, you know, non-existent US, you know, any of those. There is a sense about our shared fucked up conditions, one, but I also think that shared fucked up conditions really does have us relate to other workers of the world, which I think is absolutely essential to our political thing. Anyway, you know, I want to believe that community feels very physical to us and real, even though we don't see each other in person.
I think I don't see anybody on stack, but I'll give you a minute or two to think of whatever you're comfortable with sharing. There are a lot of really lovely notes and ideas that I've sort of gathered here today. I want to return maybe to the intent, right? This idea that we can perhaps develop some strategies, that the biography itself is maybe, in a weird way, a strategy to achieve where we want to, you know, who we want to be and what we want to do. And that it is meant to be proactive, maybe, rather than reactive. That, you know, it is, it doesn't have to come to fruition, but that it is a sort of guide, a goalpost, a thing to kind of like look to and forward to. But that, you know, you saw just in the handwritten account of myself, it's quite messy. It is a messy process. It's something that's supposed to be reworked. It's never quite finished. And I think it takes many formats. I think for some of us, it might even, you know, I think of vision boards a lot. Just a sort of like white woman Instagram visioning process, where you just collect a sort of accruement of images of beaches and clothes and sort of material objects, but that there's a vision board for us as architectural workers. I don't know if that's corny, but it helps me start to picture it, because I think sometimes we are also very visual people. As much as we like to write text, we also want to draw it to physical stuff. We want to see results, and we want to see the things that we hope for, that we're dreaming for. I guess that's the theme here. But taking it to these strategies, right? And so writing the biography is perhaps one of these strategies that we can use as workers to achieve our ambitions. But I've also just quickly was thinking about the structure of the practice. So we've been talking a lot about how larger governing forces kind of play a role on whether or not we're even going to be architects, whether or not architecture as a discipline will even be, but that there are governing forces that are even closer to us, and that is that of the firm, the structure of our office, which Laura was pulling up. And there are quite a few different versions. Some of them are strictly traditional corporate entities, and then some of them get a little bit more specific, and they start to call themselves social enterprises, where they have some sort of charter that guides them. They say, hey, we're still for profit, but we're going to perhaps be ethical. Perhaps. There are sort of nonprofits, of course, that have all sorts of different shapes and sizes and forms. Some of them work very, very closely. Cincinnati here in Ohio has 3CDC, which is a community development corporation. It's a nonprofit that works very, very closely with the city. They work more as a sort of property developer. I think personally, they've reached a scale which kind of makes me nervous, but they're doing a lot to address the built environment in Cincinnati, which is home to the US's largest historical district over the Rhine, which is a traditionally Black neighborhood that has sort of followed the way of many US cities. There are nonprofits, there are foundations. So some firms work strictly as a foundation sense. Again, there's a lot of public funding there. So these things are dependent a little bit on that larger governing agency, but there are ways to sort of be a business and produce value that is not necessarily monetary, that there are ways to be a business that allows individuals like the cooperative, right, where the employees, where the worker has choice and most importantly has some modicum of control over the projects that they do, how they're involved in those projects. You brought up the Friday, every Friday you should sit together with your coworkers and discuss what the hell you're actually doing and why you're doing it, who you're doing it for. And we've had a few conversations like that in my workplace with my immediate peers, and a lot of our discussions are, I think they're going to start a formal apparatus for this, where it's walking the talk. It's like you say a lot of shit, but are you actually doing anything? So these things are going to be formalized in a way that they were once this sort of ad hoc thing. And for that, it's really, it takes people like us here in this forum to bring ideas back into the fold, into our local environments, into our immediate environments. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I dream for. I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak, though. I know Ronak and Laura and myself have sort of shared a sense of our biographies. But if anyone else wants to answer, take a question and give it a shot, or present their own sort of strategy, we would love to hear it. Nice. Oh, 1 second, Manju. I suspect that we could, because I don't want to be overly taxing, it has been a very long week. We could wrap up around 10:30, give you all a moment to have some of your morning left or your evening. That's all right with you all. I'll turn it over to you, Manju.
I'm kind of thinking about the strategy for dealing with uncertainty, because that's something that I think I am thinking about almost every day for about a year now, about how do I plan for a future if I really don't know where I'm going to be a year from now. And that's because I'm kind of transitioning out of a doctoral program, and I don't exactly know where my kind of academic home would be a year from now. And one of the ways I'm dealing with that uncertainty is that some days I need to think of it as day by day endeavor. So it's kind of like I'm going to take it one day at a time in dealing with the stress and anxiety that goes with not knowing or being able to see into the future. And sometimes I get to think of it as like a year by year thing. So like the time frame that I work with kind of shifts on a day-to-day basis. So it's never like I'm always thinking about a year ahead. Some days it's just the day ahead. And sometimes I convince myself that whatever I do, I can only know maybe or see maybe 5 years into the future, because that's the kind of world we are living in. If at all we can look into anything at all, it's probably no more than 5 years. It's kind of fruitless to think beyond that. So kind of reminding myself that it's always kind of an iterative process, that we really don't get to ever kind of do it once, kind of, dust our hands off and say it's done and dusted. But I think that uncertainty thing, I'm being very, very general here, but I think it works in a very different way when we start living that way. That we realize that some days we really can't work according to a plan, and we just go with the flow. And next day, kind of go back to whatever we are thinking and kind of see it as a plan that we can work on. So that could be either the projects I work on. So I work on my dissertation, and that's increasingly becoming like an immediate project that doesn't actually have much value beyond I graduate. So I don't think of it as like a long-term action. It's more like something I started 5 years ago and it's kind of wrapping up. So I'm exiting the project in a way. And then I spend some time thinking about what I want to do in the future. And that literally would mean sitting down and thinking about what I want to do in the future. And some days it's just 15 minutes. Some days it's just 5 minutes. Some days it's like a passing meteor that just goes through my mind and that's it. I can't do anything more. But just kind of chunking time for projects and kind of being able to identify which projects are short-term, medium-term, and long-term seem to lend some clarity on what my life is about and where it's going. And I think when I do that, I have a sense of agency about what I'm doing. And I don't exactly love the place I'm in, but I found that there are some good things to it. And I kind of remind myself of the good things and keep myself moving. And also sometimes I think familiarity breeds contempt, right? So we get to know a place too well and we know everything bad about it. And we forget what brought us there in the first place. So I think those are kind of the behavioral and psychological ways, my strategies to live with uncertainty and yet have kind of a moral compass or a personal goalpost to work toward.
You're next in stack there, Peggy.
I have become very aware of the fact that my situation is really different than everybody else's. So indulge me here, but because I'm at the end of my career, I don't think about the future other than whether the kinds of discussions that we're having here make a difference, but in some way, if I'm talking about the end of my career, I feel like I've moved through practice, thinking that practice would be satisfying personally and maybe mean something in the world, to seeing that I was just working for rich people and I was not interested, to more and more moving to academia. And then eventually just seeing that I'm helping produce students who are going to go out there and be irrelevant in the world. Smart students. The world should hear from them, and they disappear into a struggle of, whether the office they've designed is going to be photographed and then maybe move on. It's just like tragic waste of human potential, which is how I get here. Feel like I wasn't going to change Yale. It wasn't going to happen in situ. You had to go outside of it. So here we are. And so my strategies for sanity have to do with talking to people who make me feel like I'm not crazy, and who will recognize that this kind of community matters for their sanity and hopefully for their work, you know, and whether it means coming to these meetings or doing these things or working in the lobby, or whether it just means that you go to your school or you go to your boss or you go to your employers and just say something that raises consciousness about, let's just not be part of the factory that isn't thinking about why it's producing this factory.
I think.
Oh, I was going to say, go ahead.
No,
Oh yeah. Small response. I think the only thing that would help my sanity with not being part of the larger machine is killing CEOs. And this is being recorded, so I'm not going to say anything more than that. One person just left. And the other point I remembered from earlier, I did work for a firm a couple of jobs ago that was, they worked in the Dells, and they did all the water parks in Wisconsin, all the water park resorts, not the cool slides. They did the really badly designed cabins and stuff. And almost everyone in their staff team came from a school called Madison Area Technical College. They had a 2-year associate's program for architecture, and that essentially served as their training for the firm. And so the firm didn't do any training. And that works great if you're coming from MATC, but if you're not coming from MATC, it makes it really confusing because the firm will not train you. In fact, not a lot of firms nowadays train anybody. They answer questions and they show you around, but they don't really train people. They're very adverse to training people. And I found it interesting that a firm had sort of gotten around that requirement by having a school program that would they would gear their workflow around a school program and then use that school program to have educated workers for their firm, but it falls apart with literally anybody else from any other school. And I would ask questions about stuff and they'd go, "What, you're supposed to know that?" And I go, How am I supposed to know all the stuff in your firm because I didn't go to the school that you happen to co-op for your training process?" So that's a very hyper extreme example of like, well, this particular program would prepare you perfectly for this one firm, but maybe we should find a happy medium between the two extremes. And then the other thing I remembered is that there is in terms of solutions, there is a firm in the UK that I had an aspiration to work for before the UK decided they were just going to copy the US. And it's called Forensic Architecture. And I think it's not really a standalone firm. I think it's connected to Oxford or maybe the Bartlett School. But they do investigations of like bombings, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, shady like building mysteries, and they 3D model it and they do a report and they investigate the site and they essentially come up with a narrative that says, okay, this is what happened, this is where the shot came from, this is where the building failed first, this is how it impacted the community. And I thought that's really cool. That's exactly what I want to do in architecture. I want to investigate everything about it. I just don't want to work for and I thought of them before I knew their economic status as like guns for hire that would go around to governments and be like, we can investigate this for you and do it. But really, it's a university collective that's kind of taking on its own projects, but they're not really being paid to do any of this in particular. It's just being funded as a collective effort. and it's a little, I would prefer to have the funding come from people who genuinely want to see these things solved rather than just here's a sum of money, do some cool stuff with it. The intention behind it matters to me, I think.
I just want to go in here. There's a firm here in Brooklyn called Situ. Brad Samuels is the CEO, and he actually is the person who came up with the name Architecture Lobby. But they make most of their work by producing either their own installations or other people. They have a whole shop, and so they're kind of a maker place, but they have a side gig, which is basically doing the parallel work that forensic architecture is doing, and doing many of those, because they're IT savvy, have the same capabilities as forensic to put together different people's videos in order to map out a situation to understand exactly how the police were functioning. So if you want to move to Brooklyn, but you are in Brooklyn. I thought you were in Brooklyn. Anyway, Situ, S-I-T-U.
I think Lara's on stack.
That thing that Will and Peggy were discussing, I was thinking like how we need to be sustainable in our thoughts or in our ideas. Like, okay, we can convince students that there is a different way of doing things, but when they come to the internship, they don't have an option. They need to go to this mainstream kind of studio work. Okay, so what we do this, how we do this. So we created an office that will make it different on horizontal way. I don't know, a cooperative won't have like this regular kind of client that already has some money. So we'll work with those vulnerable communities or marginalized communities. Okay, so how these people are going to pay for, because they need to eat, these people need to eat, they can't just do free work for the rest of our lives. That's something that we end up kind of doing when we graduate and go to grad school, like to master's and doctorate. We don't have grants or almost don't have grants. So you need to rely on your family's money or in side jobs that are like, I don't know, a waiter. So you are a waiter on during the weekends or whatever to pay for this dream of you. But anyway, what I'm thinking is we need to think about sustainable ways to changing this scenario. So that's where I think the public policies are important, because if you don't have the funding from, for example, a government agency to keep doing this kind of different work, and those people won't be able to pay you because they are on a vulnerable place or situation, how do you maintain this kind of different approach to reality, you know? So yeah, I was just thinking about this balance that Alex, you were talking about the nonprofit organizations, but they are nonprofit, so how they maintain themselves. So, okay, they have some government money, so it is a political question. So how to get funds for this kind of activities and this kind of action, because it's usually goes against the market will, like they don't want nonprofit organizations taking space on their market. Not that this actually happens. Like this is something that happened here with this outreach program that I was talking about on Monday. Like they work with marginalized communities. These people would never hire an architect. But still, at one point in the 2000s, the professional association sent them a letter saying you are invading our space, and they were like, no, these were never your clients to be stolen from you. So, but they also didn't have money. Like they were working through their own means during undergrads to years, and this when they reached the end of their graduation, they can't continue. Like they had this willing of continue to work in this way, like this horizontal way in a different kind of office, etc. But there were, I don't know, only a few, maybe one here, other there, those technical aids associations that where they could work, and this is just a handful of people, so like five people maximum that can try to maintain themselves somehow through this work. So it's not a sustainable way of working, at least not without public policies that actually work. Like I was saying, we have this kind of public office law, so there should be a way of maintaining this kind of activities, but it's up to the municipality to save some fund for this activity. And if they don't want to, if it's not interesting for them, so they just won't do it. So it's something that, I can't see other way out unless we engage politically, you know, to change the reality through laws, make the state be responsible for the right of those people to have a decent housing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all really for your thoughts today and your time and attention. I hope that everyone's kind of walked away with a little nugget of something that they can use and apply to their work. That's the goal here. We can maybe just have our closing thoughts. I would really, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write up some strategies for us for the plenary later this evening. I won't be in attendance, but I really hope that, it will be represented well, I'm sure, with everyone in this group with what we've discussed today. I hope that in a way as closing and sort of my thoughts on being, Peggy was like beginning here, put a lot of pressure on me. She's like, oh, you're the last one. I think, I hope, and this is maybe my dream for this workshop and maybe for this method of working of the biography as a way to kind of work through your futures, is that it is proactive and that it is looking forward and that it is projecting and changing, that it's not just it is an iterative process. It is something that is a working method rather than a sort of one and done, and either it'll be or it won't, which makes it, of course, entirely very, very difficult to do over and over again, whether it's a passing thought, whether it's 5 minutes. But it's something that you have a little bit of tenacity. I think it could be a useful tool for you all. And I think that it's an appropriate ending to maybe this week where we've been discussing a lot of different strategies and ideas for how to react and how to change. I hope that, we've all collectively learned more than one thing over the course of the week, which is, again, part of our goals here. I will leave it at that. If anybody else would like to say a word or say goodbye, I want you to feel comfortable to do so. Otherwise, we will take off and see you whenever, next time in Zoom, right? Maybe in person.
Can I just say quickly, I think this is the perfect ending to this week, because it really does come back to how it is that we inside ourselves think about the value of the time spent this week, our time when we go to work. It is the perfect ending. I'm so happy that you've done this. I'm so appreciative.
Yeah, it's very chill. It's like a nice little capstone. I won't be there at the closing plenary tomorrow, but I hope this week has been educational for everybody involved. It's a little less structured than last year's for sure, but I think it still worked out pretty well and smoothly.
Manju's on stack.
Yes, so yeah, thank you for the space. And I think one of the things I'm learning as I kind of stay in the process is that these conversations are actually valuable, that these soft and light, seemingly light conversations are actually terribly generative. So thank you for the space. And I think I also just want to make a quick remark that maybe we should get our students to kind of think of this biography from day one, from when they enter their program. So it kind of becomes a part of their practice. And I also appreciate that we had multi-generational people here, so we could speak of different perspectives at, towards the end of our career, towards the beginning. And I think that's a key part as well. A multi-generational discussion is terribly generative. So thanks, Peggy, for your thoughts about how we look back on our life and work with that. So thank you, everyone.
I look forward to the retrospective, Peggy. Okay, thank you all. We'll see you all later. Goodbye.
Bye.